I love that button.
I do too.
That button is awesome. Just as long as it's not ordering a bunch of Tide. So, hi everyone, I'm Daren Welsh again. I'm going to be moderating a panel discussion to close off today's portion of the conference. When Cindy was asking if I would be voluntold to moderate this discussion, I started kind of pushing on her on how can we make this a little bit different than some of the other panels. And my motivation was that I think that we get a little bit into an echo chamber here. I think we all like MediaWiki so much, and we like using wikis that we sing its praises, but we all say, man, I wish more people were using it. So that's my goal here, is to tease out, like, well, what is it about MediaWiki? What is it about the culture, the ecosystem that we can address as third-party users to make it better, to actually improve that metric? Before I forget to go on any further, can at least one person volunteer to take some notes? I'd like to take the feedback that we get from today's discussion and roll that into a Create Camp activity tomorrow. So we're going to take whatever we can come up with in the discussion and then use that tomorrow to hopefully come up with a roadmap or some sort of outline of, you know, what could we do to help the foundation make MediaWiki more appealing in the marketplace. So I think the official title of this panel was where is MediaWiki in the marketplace? Let's start off with some introductions, just in case we didn't, just because we're going to be in a separate video. So just briefly tell us who you are, what your background is, and if you have exposure to other software besides MediaWiki, just kind of a real brief explanation on that.
I am Cindy Cicalese. I am the product manager for the MediaWiki platform for the Wikimedia Foundation. And I was a MediaWiki user for 10 years prior to joining the foundation about a year and a half ago. And I was working in an area where we had lots of SharePoint users, I'd say would be our main competitor to the wikis, and lots of SharePoint and some Confluence.
Hello, I'm Phil Keith. I'm a master scheduler at Atlas Copco Mafi-Trench, which is a manufacturing, custom engineering and manufacturing company that works with other companies in our brand worldwide. I'm a MediaWiki power user and kind of evangelist within the organization. And we work with SharePoint Online, and engineering-focused product lifecycle management systems, and that all have overlapping use cases, so there's some challenges.
Hi, my name's Tom Harriman. I work for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission as a learning project manager. So I develop training material and try to put it online. I haven't really been involved in MediaWiki very long, other than have been wanting to do something with MediaWiki. As an organization, we've been trying to come up with a knowledge management solution, and MediaWiki has been recently selected for that option. I have some experience in SharePoint, but that's about it.
I'm Hecht. I'm the lead project manager of WikiTeq and WikiWorks, and I've been consulting MediaWiki for over 10 years, which means I've never actually been a part of an enterprise MediaWiki setup as a user, but I've been, I guess, a consultant to many MediaWiki enterprise setups from large corporations, small businesses, and organizations. So I guess I've sort of seen a number of different things from the outside.
Okay, so kind of moving in a little bit more on your history and your experience. Hopefully you've all had times where either you or someone you've been consulting or helping out, advising, has had to make a decision on which software to use in a workplace. And so how did MediaWiki fall into that discussion, and was it an easy choice? Was it an easy thing to sell? Was it a struggle? Was it, you know, what? Give us some details on those experiences.
I'll start. I recently went through this. So what we actually did is we actually went out to MediaWiki.
Mic up.
Is that better? I gotcha. Okay. Recently we did some investigating on what we were going to do with what is our choice? You know, the steering committee, we work for the Knowledge Management Steering Committee for the NRC, and so they asked, well, what are our options? So we went to, where did we go? We went to MediaWiki and said, what are the options? There's a nice list there, and lists all the pluses and minuses. So we used that as a starting point to make some idea what we wanted to do. And a number of us had been playing around with MediaWiki for a couple of years, and so we kind of pushed them in that direction. Other than we knew we didn't want to use the wiki feature of SharePoint. A number of people in the agency had a bad taste and didn't really work out well for them. And it has to do with the way they rolled out SharePoint in our particular organization. A lot of things are locked down inside the NRC. So that's kind of how we came up with it. We just kind of went out to MediaWiki, looked for the list of stuff that was out there, and sat around a room and tried to figure out what was worked best for what we wanted to do, and MediaWiki popped right out with no problem at all. So.
In our organization, I would say we struggle with some top-down driven initiatives based on probably knowledge about the, paid-for software like SharePoint and engineering-focused product lifecycle management systems that meet the specific needs of each company. But similar to Tom, SharePoint didn't really drive people's interest as far as using the built-in wikis or the features to for writing pages, for knowledge sharing, and helping all the companies work together to grow. So we're in that phase of where at a few companies it's been driven from the bottom up, kind of starting under the radar, and then we recently, with a few years ago, we merged separate wikis into one and have been working in one, but we still face the challenge of the top-down really focused on all the money they're spending, and because they made the decision on to go ahead with Office 365 and SharePoint, and then also the need for known entities of document management, which are those product lifecycle management systems that that corporate has also spent money on. I haven't been a participant in the decision-making process, so I'm not aware that a case was made for MediaWiki or other similar type software in that regard. But from outside looking in, it feels like it's still working its way up as far as the use cases in that regard.
So I've got sort of two perspectives. One from when I was working prior to joining the foundation, as well as since joining the foundation, I've tried to reach out to as many different enterprise MediaWiki users as possible to ask them about their experiences. And SharePoint is what I usually hear. We tried to use SharePoint. We started to use SharePoint. It was too complicated. It was too whatever. But my experience when I was at MITRE was that very often we've already invested in it. We already have it. It's free. We should use it. It's supported. I would say the support option is, or the lack of, a company that offers paid support for MediaWiki that will stand behind it is traditionally a problem that we hear over and over again. That, I'd love to go with it, but it's this open source software that, how do I know that it's going to be here in 5 years? Well, you can point to Wikipedia, but how do I know that if I've got a problem, there's going to be somebody to support it? And we had arguments for that, but I think Daren wants us to talk about the arguments we've heard against MediaWiki and how we can address those. So again, the arguments I would hear over and over again is, we already have paid for SharePoint, we've got it, we've already paid for the Atlassian suite of products, so we've got Confluence with Jira, and why can't we just use that? And we would often, do beautiful demos of MediaWiki-based knowledge management application systems, And people will be like, yeah, we want that. That's great. Can you just port it to Confluence for me? And of course, when it's got the built-in semantic data, no, we can't. So, so it's those types of issues that I think really, but I hear over and over again, that we started with SharePoint, and either we have to use SharePoint because that's what they say, or we tried to use SharePoint and it was just, too cumbersome, too heavyweight, and we went with MediaWiki instead.
Well, first off, my company offers paid support for MediaWiki, so that problem can be solved. Interestingly enough, I think as we've seen through the conference, most of the people through all the years who came to us needing help with MediaWiki never actually sat in a room and said, here are the products, which one would work best for us? It's somebody decided to set up MediaWiki for whatever reason. It slowly became adopted and then indispensable. And now we have to figure out, what do we do? So I would say SharePoint is probably the main competitor. Sometimes people ask us, like, how do you compare to SharePoint? But for the most part, I don't think that's the main competitor because I think MediaWiki kind of gets in under the radar and it just does its own thing. And it proves itself sort of, I guess, from the bottom up.
Yeah, so you helped transition into the next question I had, which was let's make sure we identify what we think the actual competition is. And I've heard several mentions of SharePoint, but Evita made a good case on how SharePoint can be a complementary tool as opposed to a conflicting tool. And then there was mention of Confluence. Are there any other competitors that you can think of that we should, consider when we're trying to figure out how to make MediaWiki more viable?
I don't know of any other competitors, but I would say that all the other tools can be used in tandem with MediaWiki, and we have a number of clients who actually have SharePoint and they have MediaWiki, and I think as was mentioned, I don't think I have a problem with that. They both have strengths. MediaWiki doesn't solve every problem. It could, but it's not necessarily the best tool for it. So I don't see why a competitor has to block it out, especially since MediaWiki is free. It could exist with all the other ones at the same time.
So, sorry, go ahead.
I'd like to make a comment maybe on, there's probably a vast ecosystem of engineering focused or other competencies for that. I mentioned the product lifecycle management and document management system that you may or may not know about. I know about 2 or 3 because that's what my company uses, but I imagine there's 10 times that out there that are options that are often considered when an engineering company says, hey, we need to do revision control drawings, and we're a strong technical engineering company. We need to go find a verified piece of software to do that. I don't think right now that MediaWiki and some of the previous presentations during this conference about version management, document management is immediately considered, if at all, in these companies. So that could be a challenge that some of these use cases, MediaWiki's competing against things that they may not even be aware of in those situations. And then just a quick note on, we're focused on how to use multiple solutions in a way that's best, using the best properties from both. So in our case, a couple Microsoft products, Microsoft Teams, Microsoft SharePoint Online, and also MediaWiki, and use those in a way that leverages the best features of each.
So I want to follow up on Ike's point. I thought that was a good thing to bring up, is that in a lot of cases we see people kind of bringing it up on their own from the bottom up versus the tools that are provided to us from the top down. Why do you think that is with MediaWiki? What is it about MediaWiki that...
Well, the answer is that the tools that have been provided for them are insufficient. And someone identifies a need for knowledge management that just isn't being addressed. And that's how it just becomes adopted, because people realize we need this. So I can't speak to how do you improve all the other tools, but they're clearly missing something.
So if people down in the trenches can recognize this, why are the decision makers at the top not coming to the same conclusion?
Bring them in for a panel.
What's that?
Bring them in for a panel.
I tried. I wanted to.
Well, I think they tend not to use it. I think they tend to oversee and have tools in place for other people to use, but I don't believe they use the tools. And that's one of the driving forces that caused us to come up with something, because SharePoint wasn't the tool that I could use in a learning platform to try to come up with searchable information that I could find, right? That's the problem. We have an archaic network system, potentially, that's growing, and I can't find everything because it's embedded in people's personal drives. It's embedded on people's desktops. I can't find that information. I can't learn from that information from a knowledge management perspective. So the logical solution was create a Wikipedia. And so that was what drove us, or my push to try to get that in place.
I want to actually go back and actually address this. So I think in the enterprise culture, you know, there's that saying that nobody ever got fired for using IBM. And I think the reason you have a bottom-up approach and not a top-down is because when people are having these meetings and comparing the different products, I don't think MediaWiki would win because it's just not supported by Microsoft. It's not supported by a major corporation that is going to invest billions of dollars into it for an enterprise use and support when there are issues to actually solve them. So I think that that's sort of the shortcoming of MediaWiki. It can prove itself from the bottom up, but from the top down, it just doesn't have the same level of, I guess, brand recognition as everything else. And I don't think, for the most part, it can win in that decision process.
Yeah, I agree. And again, that's also held up for, you know, interviewing lots of people who, you know, how did you get started with MediaWiki? And right after they say, well, you know, SharePoint didn't work for us, the second thing they say is, well, you know what, I just, you know, set up a server under my desk. And I've heard that from lots of people. I set up a server under my desk, I installed MediaWiki on it, and wow, it was great. And I think, you know, maybe, so yeah, it doesn't win from the top down, but you've got engineers who get frustrated because they don't want to, they can't do what they want to do in the tools that they're being told to use, and so they go rogue and they install MediaWiki and they figure out how great it is. And I think that's a strength of MediaWiki, that you can, you know, experiment with it relatively easy, although, you know, I think a lot of us have learned that if you want to set it up for a production environment, it takes a little bit more work, but you can get started really easy and experiment with it under your desk. But that's also, it creates a challenge because the people who are championing it are the people who are the hobbyists, or the, you know, the people who are willing to invest the time to set up a server under their desk and install it. And I think that if we want MediaWiki to have a greater reach and be installed on more platforms and, you know, be more available to folks, to have a larger market share of this knowledge management market, it needs to get to a point where it's easier for folks who are not hobbyists to install and maintain it. And I think that's one of the biggest stumbling blocks right now, is the difficulty of doing that.
I'd like to add one more thing, was the fact that many of these other products like Microsoft and SharePoint, there's a lot of information out there on how to do it as a user. Even install it and make it work and do different things. Whereas MediaWiki, there's a lot of great information out there about how to do different things, but the general user kind of struggles. How do I create my first page, you know? And so I think that's one thing that I think they could learn from other products is, can we create a more robust learning capability on how to do these certain things? There's, you know, great books out there on all the different features available, but there's no assignment on how to go do something. How do I create that first template? Yeah, there's some generic information, but it's just information. I don't know how I'm doing it, you know, as a person that's trying to do that right now in a blank wiki. So
Yeah, so I've never been in a position where I have to buy software for a big company, but I would imagine you call up Microsoft and say, yo, I want some Office products. It's probably pretty well fine-tuned on that process to get that software and have them come out and help you set it up or whatever. But with MediaWiki, I think we've seen several presentations trying to make it better, trying to make it more approachable. But with that, we've got, Docket, LoosSpice, Semantic Core, Meza. We've got so many different approaches out there. Sorry if I didn't name yours. But if someone's not very familiar with MediaWiki, how do they know where to start? If there's 10 different, 15 different portals, how do they know where to go? So how can that be simplified and streamlined?
So in the enterprise culture, like I said, they're going to go with the brand name leader. So all the packages that you mentioned, they do kind of block out the brand name MediaWiki, but I don't think that'll ever be the brand name. I think if MediaWiki is ever going to be the brand name for enterprise, it'll be under some other name supported by some multi-billion-dollar company that has its own name for it and builds something as a layer and repackages it at MediaWiki. And it may be one of the ones that you already mentioned. I'm sure some of us would like that. It may be the ACMU that Yaron was pushing. I think that it does block out the brand name recognition, but I don't think MediaWiki, the way it is now, I don't think it'll ever get there. I think it has to be something else like that.
Yeah, so can someone expand on that a little bit? I don't have to pretend I'm dumb on this. Let's say there was, so right now, as far as I can tell with the foundation, the software is not the top priority. It is the Wikipedia projects, right? And so we can't 100% expect the foundation to take care of our third-party desires and needs. And so if some other entity that we were to form up were to be the front face of the corporate version of it or enterprise version, like, how does that work in parallel and not in conflict with the foundation?
I don't know that I can address that specifically, the last part of that, but my perception on the how Wikimedia can solve the problems that an organization, say they get their working group together or steering group and say, we need to do document management, and maybe someone has brought up the knowledge management and maybe some other use cases. And from what I've heard in the conference, it seems to be, well, yeah, if you get the vanilla Wikimedia MediaWiki and then you add this extension, that extension, that extension, then that can probably do what you can do. Or, hey, we've got this custom-built software that we spent $1 million on, and we've got these proven clients that can do that, I think is a challenge on making MediaWiki the preferred solution, and getting to the point to where it's a package that, Enterprise MediaWiki is or under another name, like Ike said, hey, it has these capabilities and it can do this document management in this way, and your documents will be secure and revision controlled, and you have the knowledge management by writing pages and people checking it, and all the use cases are more proven and able to be communicated to an executive steering board or whoever's controlling the decisions will be a key point to kind of becoming, advancing more in that way.
I think you could kind of look at the challenge that Linux has had with trying to be adopted by the enterprise, and they've been at it for a really long time. They have a really amazing product and some really great foundations supporting it. So I don't think Wikimedia Foundation, which is awesome, I don't think that that's going to take the place of a massive for-profit company that's pushing it because they're making money. That's not the Wikimedia Foundation's mission, so it's not going to happen accidentally.
Yeah, I'm always very conflicted on this because I've had a foot in both worlds, right? So Yes, the Wikimedia Foundation, their mission and their prime objective is the Wikimedia projects. And so Wikipedia and its sister projects. And, you know, MediaWiki as the software that powers them is important, but it is secondary to that. However, it is the software that powers Wikipedia. And there's definitely a recognition within the foundation that there's benefit to having more developers who are able to work with the code and who are conversant in it. And so this is where, you know, and it's not a universally held belief, but there are definitely people, and I am definitely one of them, who feel that the more people that are using MediaWiki in different environments for different things, it exercises the paths through the code in different ways and will make it stronger and more robust for all. And also, by trying to use it in different environments, you wind up seeing creative new things. Some of, you know, what you all are doing with MediaWiki, it's very impressive, and I think it opens up more possibilities for how, even in Wikimedia projects, some of these things could potentially be beneficial. So I think there's definitely a benefit to having more people using the MediaWiki code base, and even if it's not, even if the scope of what the Wikimedia Foundation can do in support of that is limited, I look forward to a future where there is a, I look forward to a future where there is a strong group of you all formed in some way, working in concert with the Wikimedia Foundation to help improve this open source software base.
Not to put you on the spot, but is there any more details that you can give as far as how to formalize that? To, you know, right now it's sort of not really, there's no guidance or rules on how that works, right?
Yeah, well, there've been a lot of different discussions from a lot of different directions, both within the foundation as well as without. You know, I'm also a member of the MediaWiki stakeholders group and have been active in that since even before I joined the foundation. And I think that that could be one potential place, and it is a recognized affiliate of the Wikimedia Foundation, and so can work together with it. There have been a lot of discussions, nothing, you know, I wish I could say, oh, this is what's happening right now, because everything is still very much, it's a slow process. And I would like to see it move more quickly. I would love to see tomorrow stood up either within the foundation, alongside the foundation, or, you know, related in some way to the foundation, a formal organization that would represent the needs that we've discussed here. You know, providing consulting services, providing support services for the MediaWiki software, for just custom software development that, you know, for things that would be useful to the enterprise community but not necessarily useful to the Wikimedia movement, but that could be used in conjunction with MediaWiki to make the ecosystem better. Training. I'd love to see this conference, which seems to be limited to, you know, we want to break 40. I'd love to, you know, I was aiming for 70 people here, right? I keep thinking, you know, it could be hundreds. I want to see this grow. I want to see more people come and benefit from the software. Training, certification, hosting. There's so many things that could be done to help support the MediaWiki software in this community. And I want to see that happen. And so I think it takes somebody willing to step up and take the lead to do that. It's just, it's happening slowly, and there's, I think maybe there might be several different ideas and ways to go about this, and, you know, let's see which one wins.
Any ideas on how to choose what to do first that might be the best?
Oh, I
catalyst?
think every possible avenue should be investigated. And, you know, if the MediaWiki stakeholders group wants to grow and provide this, they should do so. I'm not going to stop investigating ways to make this happen also within the foundation. And I think, you know, every avenue is viable, and let's see what works.
Okay, maybe we can shift away from the big picture and the politics and kind of talk a little bit more about features and try to get everybody back involved. So, yeah, so kind of just generally, like, what is it that makes MediaWiki, what is it missing? What is it that, man, if it just had this one thing, or if this one thing was better, or two or three things, like, what, you know, where would you start with to make it better suited for enterprise use cases?
Definitely access control and single sign-on. Very closely related, but two different things. Access control is a big deal. Being able to divide one wiki into different secure sections being shown to different groups of people, which would avoid a lot of the discussion we've had today about multiple different wikis and all the challenges that that creates. If we had decent access control, which is something that really has to be integrated very deep into the core, if we could get that somehow, that would be amazing. And single sign-on with Active Directory, I know Mark is working on that, a few of you are working on that. Yeah, that's awesome. That would be very helpful too, if we had a very solid solution, because for whatever reason, people like the Microsoft products, and we have to deal with that, and we got to make sure you have your Active Directory login will get you into MediaWiki and give you the permissions that we set up for access control based on your Active Directory group.
I think it's what it needs is a combination of those key enterprise features just mentioned, as well as them all being packaged and in a way that is competes well with other products like SharePoint for document management, which I've been mentioning over and over again. That's one of our primary places where we're not. It's right now the decision is not to use the wiki because it's the complexity of adding the modules and setting it up and whatnot. Even though it might be a good idea if you were to do all of that. It'd be nice if, and I don't have all the pieces in mind, but here's the Enterprise MediaWiki package that has semantic integrated, that has single sign-on, that has all these integrations ready to go, and that, you know, this is your product and you can get set up and go that way. I think is the best way I can describe it from my point of view.
The one thing I'm thinking of is from a new user perspective, and one of the things on my job I deal with is I work with a Moodle platform, and it has what we call user tools. So I can create on every page a set of user tools that can be very long, and it walks a person through the first time they get to that page. So it walks them through every step that they need to do, and it goes away. And if they forget how to do something, it can open it back up, and it walks them right through it. Having that in MediaWiki would be just an exciting thing to do, to be able to walk through and develop a new page, create a new template, whatever it was. Or even search through the information. To give you a nice tool that you could go through and do that.
So onboarding in general, but by the way, let's talk later about extension guided tours. If you haven't heard about that, that is one way to do that in MediaWiki.
Okay.
So, excuse me. With those other features and directions in mind, which of those are compatible with the direction of the Wikipedia projects, and which of those would be conflicting? Which ones would stir up the hornet's nest in the foundation?
So I would say that there are areas that are complementary. There's no way that you could scale per page access control to Wikipedia scale. You wouldn't want to. But if you were looking at that, you know, there are use cases where something like that in a limited sense might even be useful, not to Wikipedia, but to other wikis that might be used in a Wikimedia context. So there could be something complementary, but I would never see something. So really anything, when you think about any of these so an extension, for example, and you want to think about whether it would be useful to the Wikimedia projects, you really have to think at scale. And a lot of enterprise wikis, there are some, you know, Leaguepedia, Gamepedia, the League of Legends wiki on that. Gamepedia is huge, right? So you have to think at scale for something like that. But many of the enterprise wikis that we're dealing with are not at Wikipedia scale, and so certain things might be possible for them and desirable for them and necessary for them that would not be, it would not be Wikimedia appropriate. You know, some of the, you know, integrating in with enterprise authentication systems, not necessary. But very, very necessary for enterprise wikis. So that's where you're not going to see the foundation, you're not going to see those developers who are working strictly on Wikimedia-facing projects giving any time or even necessarily you know, they may feel threatened by some of that work if it's something that could make their environment more complex or more difficult by introducing complexity into the code. So there are areas where there are, where one needs to tread more lightly and carefully. But if it affects the core code or if it needs to have an architectural change, it's something that needs to be considered at scale.
Nothing? Come on, don't get shy on me.
I think that means that we have a problem. Addressing the earlier questions, how is it going to be adopted by enterprise? Well, if enterprise requires changes that are part of the core, that the Wikimedia Foundation, for very solid reasons and very good reasons that promote its interest, right? No criticism, but are not going to be interested in implementing. So then it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's not MediaWiki that'll ever be the enterprise product. It'll be something else that can maybe build on MediaWiki, incorporate all these things somehow on a very deep architectural level, and be able to package it and sell it with those features.
So does that become a major fork, or is that somehow compatible enough such that you can still leverage off of the awesome development from the foundation?
Let's not fork.
I don't want it. I'm just asking the honest question.
Let's not even say the word fork.
I'm trying to understand how that works.
So platform evolution, Gergo mentioned a little bit about platform evolution before. We're at really the early stages of really a massive project of re-architecting core. MediaWiki has evolved over years in perhaps not always the most disciplined architectural way. And so we're going back and we're assessing the architecture of MediaWiki. And one of the first projects that we're doing right now is one of decoupling of Ike knows, Ike's involved in that project actually. But going and, you know, breaking some of the cycles between classes and MediaWiki core and improving it. As part of that, you know, and there was a discussion, so the Wikimedia technical conference, which happened in Portland in, I don't know, at some point, October, I think, there was a lot of discussion about re-architecting core and the future of directions for MediaWiki. And there was a session there on third-party MediaWiki usage and what are the key features that are requested by third-party Enterprise MediaWiki users. And there was discussion there of perhaps not having, for example, something like per-page access control. You're not going to build that into MediaWiki core. But if you can make it so that there is enough support in core that something like that could be added by an additional component or an extension, you know, we are looking very much more at componentizing core. And so my hope would be in the future ensuring that core itself is flexible enough so that some of these things could be done with MediaWiki as the base by substituting pieces, components, by, you know, putting together building blocks. So I think this is very possible. I think it's something that this community should be involved with and active with, you know, watch what's going on in Fabricator, you know, come to our conferences, come to the hackathon, come to different places and participate with us. Come here and talk to those of us, you know, we've got, 4 or 5 people from the foundation here participating this week in this conference, and we like y'all. And so we want you to be involved in this, and if there are places where you can see that there needs to be architectural flexibility so that the things that you need can be done with core in a way that does not interfere with the strength of MediaWiki and supporting the Wikimedia movement, then let's see that happen.
So not to fixate on one thing, but I think the access control is a good example. We do have extensions that provide it, but it's a matter of how much you trust it, right? And so if that feature, for example, is not something that the foundation needs to focus on because it doesn't benefit the Wikipedia sites, will it ever pass the standards for security to make sure it's actually really good?
You were going to involve the audience in this too, right?
Yes. Is this a good time for that?
I'm looking at you.
And so while we're getting the microphone passed over, so I do want to open it up for the audience. I'm hoping you guys will have way smarter questions than I have to help me wrap this up with the last 10 minutes or so.
Step up to the podium. Okay. Hi, I'm Brian. I work on the security team. In terms of like security review for core, it depends on how far a digression, like, I at least personally have no objection to core being extensible enough and having like good enough support that like ACLs can be implemented properly. As long as it has equal performance in the case you don't have any, as far as I'm concerned, that's great. And as long as it's, like if an implementation was 60,000 lines of code to add ACLs to a core, like I would have issue with that. But like assuming things are sane, I don't see that as being a problem. I don't have any objection. That said, like it's more a prioritization thing. Like if you wanted someone from Wikimedia Foundation staff to work on it, that might be a issue. But if you just want people to get out of the way, I don't think that's as much of an issue.
So I've been thinking about this ACL issue for a while, and I think, fine, I'll come up here, and I think that I would like to ask, you know, the people more knowledgeable than me, but I think content handler objects with some sort of ACL associated with them would kind of do this. Then if you could, you know, it would control whether or not you could transform things and whatever. Would that work? Here he comes again.
Off the top of my head, maybe. I mean, there is some support support in content handler for like transforming things depending on other things, but that I don't really think that's what it's made for. And like I would like to see an implementation before I really state like there's certain parts of it where I could kind of see where you could go in that direction, but I'm not entirely sure if it'd work entirely, but maybe it's possible. If I was implementing it, I don't think that would be the solution I'd choose. Because it kind of seems like it's the wrong layer. Content, for those not familiar, content handlers, like you have certain types of pages that are wiki text. Maybe you have a different markup language in a different page. Maybe you have some page that's a pretty graph. Like, so it's like different types of content, which at least for me, I kind of view as a different level from who can read the page. So it might be possible to do something in that direction, but I'm not sure, and I don't know if it's entirely like the most solid place to do it in, if that makes sense.
Well, I appreciate your input. Now I will ignore it.
As you should.
No, that's fine.
If you haven't come up with something, if you come up with something, I'd be very interested to read it.
Okay,
Well, that's more work for me.
Does anyone have any other questions outside of another topic? Let's put it that way. Just so we don't get fixated on one thing. We only have time for like one or two more questions, so.
All right, so question for you. So you guys are focusing on SharePoint and the actual corporate use of MediaWiki. How about the social use of MediaWiki competing with WordPress or any of the blog options out there, just to get the word out, to get more young people using the actual software itself?
We're the young people on this panel. Do you have something? No.
What time do you hope to wrap up?
Couple more minutes.
4 minutes.
So,
Sort of have an answer for this. Great, I have an answer to all these things. It's not an answer. I'm just kidding.
Carl, our videographer.
So my crystal ball, that is very fuzzy, says there is a startup opportunity. Not for anybody in here. You all have jobs, I hope. But maybe some group of you, kind of like the stakeholders, et cetera, should put together a startup package. If some angel investors wanted to invest in something, here you go. And people who care what these people do might want to help direct them. Because, like, access control, nobody has time to code that, right? So it's never going to happen. Unless there's a big pile of money. And why would there be a big pile of money? A startup who wants to invest and see some return 3 years later. That's how startups work, right? Look out the window. There they all. So that is my, like, answer. And also, I honestly do believe that maybe a few hours a year should be dedicated towards having that ready so that when it did happen, they don't fork it. Because that's what will happen. There's plenty of examples of here's an open source package, someone invested in it, and it went that way and fell off a cliff. There you go. Oh, hey, you want to respond to this? Fantastic.
There you go. That sounds cool. I'm not going to respond directly to that, but that's cool. I wish I had a good answer to the question about getting, the young people, because I think sort of associated with what Carl's saying, what we need is the killer app, right? The Facebook is, no, should I say no? of MediaWiki. How can we use MediaWiki in a way that it's more engaging for the general populace? One of the things that I've heard from the NASA guys a bunch is how cool it would be if, somebody went and saw something wrong in Wikipedia and said, hey, wait, I know how to edit that. I can fix that because I saw that at work, right? well, how about if the kids were using MediaWiki for something? Well, we don't have time for me to talk about MediaWiki or Wikipedia in education and how frustrated I've been at the lack of the school system of embracing Wikipedia as an information source. Yeah, I could go on that for that. Catch me tonight at the social. But kids are actually steered very often away from Wikipedia, and I wish that weren't the case, but if we could get them using MediaWiki in the schools, yeah. If we could make it cool for them to use MediaWiki, that would be one way to...
So SnapWiki.
There you go, SnapWiki.
All right. Okay, one more. Yep. And then we'll have to wrap it up after this.
So there was discussion on MediaWiki and competitors of MediaWiki in the knowledge management segment, where it typically competes with very expensive software where the sales stuff is paid more than the entire Wikimedia Foundation stuff. I'm interested in the other end, like generic content management, where the competitors are also mainly free software. And if you look at something like Drupal, for example, then it's not easy to install, it's not well documented, it's not particularly developer friendly. It's vastly more successful than MediaWiki in terms of number of installations, in terms of finance. So just Acquia employs, I think, 4 times more developers than the Wikimedia Foundation, and Acquia is just a tiny part of the Drupal financial, like, consultant ecosystem. So I am wondering what's the difference on that side that holds MediaWiki back.
Well, I think that one of the big challenges of MediaWiki is usability. For example, you mentioned creating a new page. Well, there are 2 ways to do that. You can either highlight your URL, type something in, which nobody in the world is going to do, or you can search for the page, find out it doesn't exist, and click the red link. That's the default way to do that. You could sit somebody who's non-technical, sit them down, ask them to create a new page, and see how long it takes them. Nobody will ever figure that out. So I think it has to become more usable out of the box. I know, of course, there are many ways to improve it, and that's what we do. But I think that would be a big focus. Visual Editor goes a long way toward that. But I would say, after the things I mentioned before, access control, single sign-on, usability would be a very close next on the list.
Okay, thanks for staying later. I know we ran a little bit long, but hopefully it was a good discussion. And please participate in tomorrow's follow-up and help us put an outline together. Thanks.